Hello and welcome back. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. France has defended its decision to recognise the Palestinian state amidst the domestic and international criticism it's facing. France's foreign minister argued that the decision goes against Hamas as it stands for a two-state solution. The Kremlin says that it is unlikely that a peace deal on the war in Ukraine will be completed within 30 days. Meanwhile, Ukraine says a global Starlink outage hits its military communications as peace efforts continue to stall. Delegations from Iran and the E3 nations of Germany, France and the UK have begun talks on Iran's nuclear activity. The E3 leaders have threatened snapback UN sanctions amid nuclear tensions following Iran's 12-day war with Israel and US military action. Reports suggest that Bill Clinton and Donald Trump letters to late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein have been found in a book for his 50th birthday. Questions have been raised about Trump's relationship with Epstein amid controversy over the release of his files. The UN rights chief has slammed Britain's ban on activist group Palestine Action as a misuse of the UK's counter-terrorism law. They have further asked the Starmer government to rescind its move. Thailand says that the number of civilians evacuated from its border with Cambodia has risen to 138,000. Meanwhile, clashes continue as tensions remain high, with at least 16 deaths reported so far. US media is reporting that Fed Chair Jerome Powell is privately adamant on serving out his full term, despite a continued dispute with President Trump. The US president made jibes at Powell in person and has publicly spoken about wanting to fire the Fed chief. And the Philippine Supreme Court has blocked an impeachment trial against Sara Duterte. The vice president was accused of misusing public funds and threatening to kill President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. by the lower house of the Philippine Parliament. But we start this hour in the Middle East. Humanitarian aid remains stuck at Gaza's border, unable to enter despite ongoing efforts. Critical supplies are being sent, but are halted, deepening the humanitarian crisis. The delay is worsening conditions for millions in desperate need. This comes as the United Nations warns over 1 million children in Gaza face starvation, with malnutrition deaths rising sharply. Nearly 9% of children under the age of 5 are now acutely malnourished, up from 2.4% earlier this year. Food supplies, including flour, have been collected, but are insufficient to meet urgent needs. Let's now have a look at what Farhan Haq, the deputy spokesperson for the Secretary General of the UN, has had to say.
The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reports that UN teams were able to collect food aid, mainly flour, from Kerem Shalom and Zikim crossings yesterday. But our partners note that more than 1 million children are bearing the brunt of deepening starvation and malnutrition, with reports of death from malnutrition increasing by the day. According to our partners working in nutrition, in the first 2 weeks of July, nearly 5,000 of the 56,000 children under the age of 5 who were screened for malnutrition in the Gaza, Deir el-Bala, and Khan Yunis governorates were found to be acutely malnourished. This is a staggering 9% rate, up from 6% in June and just 2.4% in.
Meanwhile, Palestinians mourn the death of journalist Adam Abu Habid, killed in an overnight Israeli strike on a tent sheltering displaced families. His sister-in-law pleads, "We are not just numbers." Here is what the family of Palestinian journalist Adam Abu Habid have said.
يطلعوا بعين رأفة إلنا شوي. إحنا مش مجرد أرقام، إحنا مش رقم. هذا أب وراه أولاد، وراه التزامات، عائلة بتستناه، عائلة بدها إياه طول الوقت جنبها. إحنا مش تعداد، مش رقم. إحنا مش حتى رقم بطلنا ننعاد من كتر ما إحنا بنموت. ارحمونا شوي، ارحمونا وبس.
Well, joining us to go through all of these updates that we are bringing you on the situation in Gaza, Martin Saar-Reyes, a foreign affairs expert who is joining us live from Ecuador. Martin, as always, thank you ever so much for joining us on the programme. More concerns being raised about the amount of aid in the Gaza enclave. Of course, UN aid waiting outside the border but not able to get in. What needs to be done in order to improve the situation on the ground for so many and children that are facing such difficulty in even staying alive with the amount of hunger at play?
Yeah, Joshua, absolutely devastating news. I think the only strategy that the UN and the international community can perform is to give Israel a sense of security in order to work together and open the borders in a responsible and secure way. It's absolutely devastating that civilians in Gaza are starving. It's absolutely sad and devastating. I think obviously no political pressure will do anything. We have been watching this for all of the time that we haven't been watching this war. I don't think any political pressure will do anything. The only thing that can help this is to give Israel any kind of guarantee that this is going to be watched, that this aid and this food is going to be serving the people in the Gaza Strip, and it won't be used for Hamas, and Hamas will not be taking all of this international aid.
Yes, absolutely. And that is a big concern from Israel, of course, that aid is getting into the wrong hands once it enters into Gaza. But also questions raised about the GHF and the current system in which aid is being distributed. Over 1,000 deaths reported around these aid sites, of course, in a country that is facing military pressure from Israel. The concerns are there, the difficulty, as you say, around diplomacy is that it is stalling. Pressure is not leading to concrete action, with both Hamas and Israel locked in negotiations with no further progress. What does the international community need to do, maybe aside from just condemning what's going on and the humanitarian situation within Gaza? What do the international community need to do to try and push a ceasefire over the line so that this issue can be resolved diplomatically and fighting can end, even if just temporarily for 60 days?
You're absolutely right, but as I said, this is not it's not going to be solved with political or international bellic pressure. We've seen before, no pressure, no hostility against Israel will do anything to help the people in need in the Gaza Strip. We need to focus right now in the way this is being distributed. We need to focus in the logistics. Right now, Israel is very concerned about how the international community is helping the Palestinian people in Gaza, but this unfortunately can be misused for bad means. A lot of means to protect the people in Gaza have been used by Hamas for causing more terror, for innocent civilians in Gaza, for Israeli civilians. So the only way that the international community can cooperate with Israel in order to help the Palestinians is to make sure this is not going to be taken for Hamas, that Hamas is not going to be using this, and that no weapons and no means for destruction are going to be smuggled in the Gaza Strip.
Yes, and
giving
Martin,
guarantees to Israel, basically.
Yes, Martin. As we bring an end to this discussion, I raised this point earlier in the day, but I want to pitch it to you now. Of course, Hamas, as we know, have been weakened. Iran, as we know, following the 12-day war, their military facilities, their nuclear capabilities, as well as top generals and scientists, have been damaged and limited and weakened as well. Given the state that Hamas are currently in compared to what they were during those horrific October 7th attacks of 2023, do you think that some leeway should be given to the situation given the humanitarian crisis in Gaza?
I think the international community should pressure the authorities in the Gaza Strip that the hostages need to be released. Israel is not going to cooperate until the hostages are not released. So the moment that there's no more Israeli hostages in Gaza, that will be the moment Israel won't have any type of justification to not cooperate with the logistics for aid in Gaza. But in the same time, if the hostages are not going to get released, nothing can be done, basically.
Martin Sarta-Reyes, thank you ever so much for joining us. This topic, of course, is an extremely difficult one, with pain being felt on both sides for civilians, and we will continue to bring you all of the updates on the diplomatic efforts and the state of play on the ground in the Gaza Strip. But we move now to North America, and a 2003 birthday album compiled by Jeffrey Epstein's associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, for his 50th birthday reportedly contains messages from nearly 50 prominent individuals, including US President Donald Trump and former President Bill Clinton. According to the US news outlet Wall Street Journal, the album featured a range of celebrities, business executives and political figures. According to reports, among those named were investor Leon Black, designer Vera Wang, attorney Alan Dershowitz, model scout Jean-Luc Brunel, former Victoria's Secret owner Les Wexner, and ex-Microsoft executive Nathan Myvold. Moreover, the British ambassador to the US and politician Peter Mandelson were listed under a section titled Friends. This comes after the news outlet reported last week that Trump had allegedly authored a bawdy letter to Epstein, who died in jail in 2019 after he was arrested on federal sex trafficking charges. Trump has denied authorship, calling the letter fake, and has since filed a libel and slander lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal, its reporters, publisher Dow Jones and Rupert Murdoch. Well, joining us on the programme to discuss this latest developments in a conversation that is not going away surrounding ties to Jeffrey Epstein from President Trump and other prominent people in North America and beyond. Eric Wahlberg, thank you for taking the time to join us on the programme, a political analyst. You're joining us from Toronto. Eric, I want to look, of course, at this report specifically, around 50 letters for Epstein's 50th birthday. These are reports, we must acknowledge that. The Wall Street Journal, who of course have been writing other reports relating to Donald Trump's relationship with Eric Wahlberg. Is this constant reminder from the US media damaging Donald Trump's reputation over an issue that has already caused controversy, not just amongst his opponents, but also his most loyal MAGA supporters?
It's absolutely the pulling the rug out from under Trump. And all his lies about lies. It's so clear that this greeting to Epstein by him was in fact by him. He's noted for making sketches. He loves making sketches. He's actually got some talent as a sketcher. And his greeting featured a nude woman with inappropriate mentions within it was a disgrace. But it turns out Clinton also made a similar birthday greeting where he marvels at Epstein's wonderful childhood innocence, which is breathtaking because what these men were doing was raping children. It's the exact opposite. They were demons, if you like. And not only these letters, but the really very damning testimony was at a libel suit, was a suit launched by one of the victims 10 years ago. Her name was Katie Johnson, and it was available on YouTube until yesterday when it was brought down. And her testimony is that she met Trump when she was 13, she was a virgin, and Trump really liked virgins. So he insisted on raping her. And he did this multiple times. So really, he is, but you look at Trump and you can see that he's a lascivious, he's a lecherous.
Yes, Eric, I'm just going to interject briefly there. Of course, we are not saying here on NewsX World that those claims are true. These allegations, of course, have not been proved in a court of law. But yes. Eric, I do want to, of course, look at the potential ramifications for some of the most important and powerful people in America in recent years. I do want to, of course, again, stay along the right side of the line in terms of claims that are being made, Eric. But let's see the reputation damage that whether these reports are true or not, what damage is this doing to Bill Clinton, Donald Trump and some of the other names we listed, their reputations in the face of so much uncertainty on this issue in the United States?
Okay, well, it seems that Trump's real crimes are, of course, genocide in Israel-Palestine and bombing Iran for no reason at all, no real reason that's be provable in a court of law, as you mentioned. But it seems that America, if you have these peccadillos, these sexual indiscretions, that might be enough to impeach. And in fact, that's how Clinton's impeachment was over a much milder instance, which was proved in a court of law with I forget her name, but a fan of Clinton, and she convinced him into letting her give him fellatio in the White House, and then she kept the dress, and it was then shown that was his emission on the dress, and that was enough to lead to his impeachment. So if these evidence, and there's just mounds of evidence, but what happens with this Katie Johnson is she was shut up. She was probably told, you're going to die unless you withdraw your allegations against Trump. So she did, and she's still alive. But on the internet, things keep there. So her testimony is still there, and whether it's in a court of law, it's the court of law for MAGA supporters is the truth, and you can find the truth without a court of law, and that's what's happened to Trump now, that he's been caught in his own trap of his just disreputable private life, which is undermining his reputation as president, and it's never going to end.
Eric,
so this is something that we have to look for his impeachment.
Yes, Eric, we will be moving on, but thank you ever so much for your time on that topic. We move on now, and as the clashes between Thailand and Cambodia continue to escalate, there are reports of hundreds of Cambodians taking shelter on the grounds of a Buddhist pagoda in Oda Minchi province, fleeing the border. At least 16 people have lost their lives so far in the intense clashes, and over 4,000 people have been displaced from their homes, though that figure is believed to be a lot higher than 4,000. As countries offer to mediate the war, Cambodian Prime Minister has said that the key to resolving the current conflict is Thai acceptance of a ceasefire. He also said that Thailand reversed its initial support for Malaysia's PM ceasefire proposal. Meanwhile, the spokesperson of Thailand's foreign ministry has said that the country favours a bilateral solution to the escalated armed confrontation with Cambodia. Moving on now, and resident doctors in England began a 5-day strike over pay, putting pressure on Prime Minister Keir Starmer's Labour government, which had vowed to end industrial unrest. The British Medical Association argues the government's 5.4% pay offer fails to account for years of wage erosion, affecting nearly half of the NHS workforce. Meanwhile, Health Minister Wes Streeting described the strike as reckless and needless, urging talks instead. Doctors counter that the dispute is broader than pay. It's about the future of the NHS and whether the government truly listens. We'll now take a listen to what Health Minister Wes Streeting has said on the matter.
We are doing everything we can to minimise the risk to patients and to minimise the disruption. But I want to be honest with people. What we can't do is eliminate disruption or risk to patients. We know that there have been operations, appointments and procedures already cancelled, and we know that there will be real challenges over the next 5 days. And that is why the Prime Minister and I are so angry on behalf of patients and other NHS staff who are working hard to keep the show on the road, that the BMA have taken what is reckless and unnecessary action, forgetting that they've had a 28.9% pay increase from this government, and this government was also willing to go further on improving their working conditions.
Well, picket lines outside of hospitals signal a return to the 2023-style turmoil, and as amid inflation and stagnant wages. Public opinion has also shifted, where polls now show 52% of people oppose the strike action. Well, joining us to discuss these protests, which could, of course, have ramifications on the healthcare system in the United Kingdom, Keith Vaz, a former UK minister who is joining us from London. Keith, I myself was reporting on these strikes in 2023 when they were ongoing about pay for doctors, junior doctors, sit-in doctors. But it seems obviously that there has been a shift in government, but the conversations still remain the same. Is this a political issue, or is this a wider issue about society in the United Kingdom at the moment in the face of a cost of living crisis?
Good afternoon, Joshua from London. Look, the situation is very sad because I never thought that we would have doctors on a picket line when you had a Labour government, because one of the commitments of a Labour government is to provide a decent national health service that is free at the point of need. The last group that a Labour government wants to take on, in my view, is anyone in the medical profession, be they nurses or doctors. And I think it is essential that what we try and do is to try and get this resolved as soon as possible. It's true, doctors have had a increase in their pay, as Wes Streeting has said. But of course, he is now the Secretary of State. And when this dispute was happening in 2023, Joshua, when you were out on the picket line reporting on it, you will know that he, as the shadow health secretary, would have been very supportive of the doctors. So this is a political embarrassment, and it's also going to cause a lot of hardship for the patients. I myself I'm waiting for my operation, so I don't know whether or not it is still going to take place because of this strike. So we hope that it can be resolved quickly. Should never get to the stage, never, where doctors and nurses and anyone in the NHS are actually protesting against a Labour government, because the NHS is so central to the philosophy of Labour. It was created by a Labour government. It is, in a sense, Labour's baby. You do not want to see your baby, even though it's grown up a lot now, in this kind of situation. So Wes Streeting, who I know very well, I know he must be very sympathetic situation, will want to get this resolved quickly. It's a big political headache. Obviously, you don't need a doctor for a headache, but you do need to cure your headache as quickly as possible. And I should think he needs to get round the table and see what can be done. The political aspect is, you see doctors saying you can find money to go and give to Ukraine, you can find money for defense, but you can't find money for us in the NHS. And junior doctors, that's who we're talking about, resident doctors, are the people that you would see. I mean, a few weeks ago, I was in A&E, suffering from terrible pains. And, you know, the treatment I got was free, but also exceptional. Within 24 hours, I had been helped and given a pathway, massive care being given to me as a result of my illness. And that was phenomenal. It's the thing we're most proud of. So we don't mind anyone else going on strike, but we do mind our doctors going on strike. So it's in the government's interest, a Labour government's interest, to make sure that this is dealt with as quickly as possible.
Yes, absolutely, Keith. Very briefly, before we let you go, is this a wider sort of snapshot on Keir Starmer's first year or so in office? Of course, Labour say that the government and the situation that they inherited from the Conservatives was in such a bad state that it's going to take time and things are going to get worse before they get better. But it has been over a year, and a lot of the same issues that were being raised under the Conservative government are now still being raised. How does Keir Starmer and his government turn the corner as he looks to step away from these issues facing citizens of the United Kingdom?
Joshua, that's not a brief answer that you've asked for. It's an essay.
My apologies.
Because there's a lot of stuff that should be done. But you know what the people will be seeing on their screens is Starmer meeting Modi yesterday, Starmer meeting Trump tomorrow, and the doctors on strike. So it's not good images at the moment, and I would think that he'd want to move swiftly to try and deal with this issue. Doctors, nurses, the NHS, cardinal principle of the way in which we operate in the UK. I think it's not been a terrific year for this new government. It never is for a new government. And of course, every new government always blames the last government for the mess that they've left. So I think that Keir Starmer will want to turn the corner quickly, and he'll want to make sure that things are put on the right track.
Yes, Keith Vaz, thank you ever so much for answering that question in a short amount of time and providing that unique insight that you have as a former minister. Of course, these strikes lasting 5 days, and any further updates from them, from the United Kingdom, we will bring to you. But we move on now further east, and emergency crews have recovered the flight recorder of an Antonov AN-24 passenger plane that crashed in Russia's Far East, killing 49 people on board. As per reports, the black box will be sent to Moscow for analysis as part of an ongoing investigation into the crash. The Angara Airlines flight lost contact with ground dispatchers at around 1 p.m. local time on Thursday, while flying several kilometres from the airport in the town of Tinder. Emergency officials said the aircraft did not issue a distress signal or report any technical issues before it disappeared from radar. Rescue teams later located the charred wreckage approximately 16 kilometres from Tinder, a town of less than 30,000 people. Investigations have opened a criminal probe into the crash. Well, concerns grow as aviation incidents seem to rise in 2025, with experts analysing the reasons behind these seemingly increasing crashes. Well, joining us to discuss this tragic situation and the next steps now that the black box has been found, Mark Dombroff, an aviation attorney from the Fox Rothschilds LLC, who's joining us from Arlington County in Virginia. Thank you ever so much for taking the time, Mark, to speak with us. How significant is finding this black box of the aircraft to understanding what went wrong and what led to the death of almost 50 people?
I think it's very significant, Joshua. The black box, which is actually orange, as I think most people know, records a whole bunch of parameters of the aircraft as it continues to operate. That includes the position of the flight control surfaces, reflecting what commands the pilots have put into the system, the performance of the engines and so forth. And we can hope that the recordings are intact and usable. I suspect that since this airplane was at least 50 years old, which in and of itself is not bad so long as it's been maintained properly, that the parameters that the black box was recording are probably limited as compared to the more modern aircraft. But it is a critical part of accident investigation, since it is, frankly, an objective view of how the aircraft was performing throughout the last minutes of the flight.
Yes, Mark, there has been a number of high-profile plane crashes in recent times. Of course, at the end of last year, the Jeju Air crash, the Washington Potomac crash, of course, the recent Air India crash, which killed over 250 people, and now this Russian crash. Is there a concern around the safety of aeroplanes, given this increasing number, or at least apparent increasing number, of deadly incidents involving passenger planes?
I don't think the occurrence of these accidents in and of themselves gives rise to some sort of overriding concern, Joshua. I think the fact is that aviation is enormously safe. The fact is that we will continue to have accidents. It's not a pleasant thing to say, but we will continue to have accidents. There is no common thread that I'm aware of, or that I've seen anybody else talk about, in terms of the various accidents that have occurred, whether it's the mid-air collision over the Potomac River, whether it's the Jeju accident in Korea, or the tragedy, the Air India tragedy that is still obviously under very active investigation. I think that the three elements that are going to be looked at in this Angara accident are certainly the performance of the crew, the performance of the aircraft, and then at least preliminary reports would suggest that the weather may have been a factor. I think some of the reports indicate that this aircraft, which is a workhorse aircraft, that this aircraft made one approach and they decided to go around, which is not all that unusual because of the weather. And it was during the second approach that the aircraft crashed. So these are the things that the investigators out of Moscow will be looking at.
Yes, Mark, and looking at these incidents, of course, potentially all different reasons, but should there be more work done internationally looking at safety standards, potentially more to appease people who are getting on flights with this number of crashes that we have seen? Of course, some people are fearing flying now, uncertain as to whether taking a flight is the best option, even though data tells us that it is probably the safest way of travelling.
I think that having been in the aviation industry as an attorney for as long as I have been, which is several decades, looking at ways of improving safety is an ongoing, constant thing. So the fact is that it doesn't take an accident for manufacturers, for operators, for the air traffic control systems throughout the world to look for better ways to do that, safer ways to do it. It's a bar which is constantly being raised, and the industry is constantly looking at ways to improve levels of safety. I think that the danger is that once, whether it's a regulatory authority, whether it's an operator, an airline, once they say we are safe, that's when the problems start to occur. We can always be safer, but it is an extraordinarily safe way to travel.
Mark Dombrov, thank you ever so much for joining us and providing that unique insight. We will continue to bring you updates on the investigations, not just of that Russian air crash, but of course the ongoing investigations into the